Hi everyone, it's Alice, and today it's gonna be all about witch books. So if you're anything like me, you're always on the lookout for books about or with witches in them. And I love reading these kinds of books. I've been obsessed with them since I was a child. And today, I thought I would just mention all of the ones that I've read. Now, the reason I'm gonna go through all of them is that I feel like if I do it this way, it's more likely that you'll find something that you haven't heard of before or that you haven't read. And I feel like when I do more like curated recommendations, I always recommend the same books, which are my favorites. But I actually have quite a lot of witch books that I've read that I've liked, but I just don't mention as much. So I thought I would just talk about all of them today. I actually have a whole list of witch books that I'm constantly working on where I have like read, owned, unread, and books that I'm interested in. Like, it's a whole thing. But today I'm just gonna go through the ones that I've read. I am gonna skip a few that I've read that I didn't like as much. So all of the ones that I mentioned in this video I have enjoyed, because I don't want to recommend you a book that I don't like and then you don't like it and then you hex me and it's a whole situation. Because there are so many of these, I've split them into different sections so you can skip around a little bit. And I've basically categorized these in a way that makes sense to me. So we have cozy and heartwarming, dark and gothic, folklore and mythic, and fun and slightly chaotic. And I'm sure a lot of these books could fit into several of these, but I'm just gonna put them where it makes the most sense to me. Anyways, let me stop explaining and let's actually just get into the books. I'm not gonna go into depth about all of these because then we would be here all day, but this might still be a longer video, so feel free to like grab yourself a snack or something. Let's start with the cozy and heartwarming books. With this first one, you can kind of tell how cozy it is just by looking at it. This is The House Witch, and this is a fantasy book with a little bit of romance to it and a little bit of mystery in it as well. This story is set in a magical kingdom where we meet the new royal cook at the royal castle, and he is a bit of a mystery when he gets to the castle. No one really knows much about him. He kind of rubs everyone the wrong way and he's very grumpy. And the story is really about him finding his place in this castle, and we learn some of the secrets that he has, and he makes some new friends. And this one is just like a very cozy book with a lot of food, friends, there's some cats, there's more food, and it's really just a very cozy book. It has some romantic bits to it, it has some serious bits, there's some political intrigue in this kingdom, and it's just a sweet, nice little book to get lost in. This is also the first in a series, so if you like this one, there's more to read. Secondly, we have a graphic novel. It's Mooncakes by Suzanne Walker, and this one follows a teenage witch who works in a bookshop where she helps the people of her New England town with spells, and she also investigates like supernatural occurrences in her town. And one day while she's doing that, she comes across a werewolf in the woods who happens to be her childhood crush. This is a very sweet book. The art is really lovely, and I feel like this is just a treat to read. Then we have The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandanna, and this one is about this young witch who lives her life in Britain, and she's one of the few witches there, and they've all sort of agreed that they need to keep their heads down and keep their powers hidden, and they can't really gather because they attract attention to themselves. So although she's a witch, she's kind of lonely and she has to hide big parts of herself throughout her life. And then one day this mysterious letter arrives asking for her help to train these three young witches at this place called Nowhere House. And even though she kind of knows that it's against the rules, she decides to go. And the story is all about her going there, and it's very much a story about like found family and magic. There is a little bit of romance to it, and it's just very sweet and heartwarming. We then have one that I read last fall. It's In the Company of Witches by Auralee Wallace. This one follows a witch who has to do some investigating and solve a mystery when a guest dies at her aunt's bed and breakfast, and her aunt is implicated in the case. And the story is all about this witch trying to figure out what actually happened and solve this mystery, but she's also dealing with a lot of personal stuff. She's dealing with grief, and her husband has died and she's in the middle of that. And they all come from a long line of witches as well, which is cool. The town this is set in is excellent. Like, it has major autumnal vibes and it's so good. So that makes it even cozier, I feel. Next, we have got Payback's a Witch by Lana Harper, which is set in this magical town where our main character hasn't gone back to for years, but she decides to go because there's this huge spell casting tournament that's gonna take place in the town, and her family, they're sort of referees in this spellcasting tournament where all of these powerful magical families compete. And so the story is all about her taking part in that, and then there's also this badass, very enticing woman that she runs into when she gets back into town who happens to be a part of one of these powerful magical families. I will say this has a very particular snarky tone to it that I don't think is for everyone, and usually I'm not like a huge fan of it, but for some reason in this one it really worked for me, and I just had a lot of fun reading this, even though it is like way over the top. Lastly, for the cozy and heartwarming books, I have these two books by Alice Hoffman, and I feel like these could have just as easily been put into some of the other sections, but I've put them here because I feel like there's something cozy about the nostalgia of these, even though they are a little bit darker in parts. The first one of these is, of course, Practical Magic, which is set in the 90s and follows two sisters of the Owens family, which is like a long line of witches, and they've grown up in this town where they've always been outsiders, and they've wanted to leave because of that, and they have in their adult lives, but then the bonds of fate bring them back. Now, this whole like series follows different generations of the Owens family, and they're all cursed. So any man who comes to love an Owens woman is basically doomed. The second one is The Rules of Magic, and in this one we're in the 60s and 70s, and we're actually following the aunts of the characters that we're meeting in Practical Magic. And we sort of get to see their backstory, and again, they're also cursed with the same curse. This series is really good though, and even though they are in a series, I feel like you can read them out of order and just pick whichever one you're the most interested in. They're all magical, and obviously we're following witches in these books, but I would say that the witchcraft is more like nature magic, and it's a little bit more subtle, but it's still very magical. Secondly, we have some dark and gothic books, starting with Slewfoot by Brom, which is historical fiction horror set in colonial New England, where we meet a spirited young woman whose husband dies under mysterious circumstances, actually very quickly after they got married, and she is in this place and she wants to keep whatever freedom she can, which is very difficult in this puritanical society, and she's willing to fight for what freedom she can keep, which obviously makes the men of the town very angry. At the same time as this is happening, there's also a spirit in the woods that is awakening. And the story is all about both the spirit and our main character having to find out who they are. And I would say that this is quite dark. It has some illustrations in it, which I feel like give off the vibe of the book very well. And it does get a little bit like violent and gory towards the end, so just be aware of that. This is definitely on the darker side. The next one is actually a little bit similar to Slewfoot, but I would say that this leans a little bit more YA. It's The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson, and this one is also set in a very rigid puritanical society where we meet a young woman who is like the result of an unholy union because her mother had her with an outsider, and her mother has since passed, but this whole thing like brought her whole family into disgrace, and she's just trying to fit in, but she has a lot of questions, and there may be some answers in the dark wood that surrounds the town, but no one is supposed to go in there, but she does, and the forest sort of gives her a diary that may answer some of her questions. Next, we have a book that I actually read last month. It's Witchcraft for Wayward Girls by Grady Hendrix, and this is set in the 70s in Florida, and it's set at a home for wayward girls, which is basically a home where pregnant girls, like teenage girls, are sent when they get pregnant out of wedlock, and they're sent there to have their babies and give them up and go home and pretend like nothing has happened. So this is obviously not a great place to be. And our main character is one of these young girls, and the story is all about her life there and her whole situation and the other girls that are there. But it's also about how everything changes when a traveling librarian gives her a book about witchcraft. This is horror, so it definitely has some gruesome stuff in it, but actually the horror is like a mix of supernatural horror and real life horror. And I would say that the witchy stuff is a big part of this book, but it is kind of like a side element that's really good, but it just sort of adds to the story. And the book is really about these girls, and the witchcraft is all about power and freedom, and it's really interesting. And the mix of those kinds of horror elements, it really, really worked for me. It is a little bit spooky though, and there are a few scenes with some witches that I think is gonna stick with me for a long time because I have some mental images of some things, and yeah, it's a little creepy. Then we have a book by one of my favorite authors. It's A Sorceress Comes to Call by T. Kingfisher, and this one actually follows the daughter of a witch, and our main character lives alone with her mother, and her mother is not great. And the story sort of takes off when her mother decides to uproot them from their small town because there's been a suspicious death, and she has decided to move them because she has her eye on this wealthy man who she intends to lure into marriage. The story is about what happens mostly when they get there, and it's about how the daughter sort of bands together with this guy's sister, and the sister is hell-bent on like saving both her brother and this daughter from this horrible woman. This is a little bit dark and scary in parts, but it also features a very protective flock of geese, so I feel like it sort of evens out. Moving on, we have a book that I read quite a few years ago now, so to be fair, I don't remember a lot from this book, but I do remember that I really liked it. It's A Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness, and I feel like I remember this being kind of dark and gothic, but I'm wondering if I'm basing that mostly on like how I imagined the setting and the magic. This is set in Oxford, where this young scholar manages to unwittingly call for this like lost and magical manuscript, and she comes from a long line of witches, but she wants nothing to do with witchcraft, so she sends it back. But this thing sets a lot of other things into motion, and she can't really get away from it. This is a mix of history, magic, romance, and suspense, and I actually really should reread these books because it's been such a long time. I feel like I don't know how many there are in the series now, but I'm pretty sure I've read 3 of them, and I think I would really like to reread them. There is also a vampire in these books, if that interests you. Next, we have another one where I feel like the vibe of the setting is kind of gothic. It's Cackle by Rachel Harrison, and I guess that this isn't too dark, although there are some pretty memorable horror scenes that have stuck with me from this, so maybe it actually is. It follows a woman who gets dumped by her longtime boyfriend and just decides to just move to this town to get away from everything, and she wants a fresh start. And when she gets there, she gets to know this magnetic, charming, interesting woman who wants to show her that she's more than what she thinks she is, and who is probably a witch. This isn't like my favorite book personally, but it's one of those books that I think a lot of other people would really like, and there were some parts of this that I really, really enjoyed. I think that the setting is really good and the magical stuff. Lastly, for this category, we have In the Shadow Garden by Liz Parker, and this is also maybe not like the darkest of dark books, but the thing that made me put it in this category is that the witches in this book have a shadow garden, and the way that I pictured that garden was very like dark and gothic. It's set in a small town in Kentucky, and it actually follows 3 different generations of witches that are all from the same family, and they are known in town for having this shadow garden and for supplying the local distillery with this special like ingredient that can make a bourbon that makes people forget their worst memory. There is a little bit of a mystery in this one though, because 20 years ago the whole town forgot like a whole summer where one person died and another person disappeared, and so the book is sort of about unraveling what happened back then. Moving on, we have books with folklore and mythic vibes, starting with the very well loved Circe by Madeline Miller. And this is well loved for a reason, because Miller is an excellent writer, and this book is just amazing. This one is a mythology retelling of the myth of Circe, the goddess of witchcraft, who gets exiled and banished by Zeus, basically, and she goes to live on this island where she spends centuries passing time and coming into contact with some of the most famous names from mythology and history. This one is such a great read. Like, Miller is such a good writer. Like, I don't even know how to describe it, but it just gets me. We then have another book by Alice Hoffman. It's Magic Lessons, and you know that curse that I mentioned affects all Owen's women? In this book, we learn the origin of that curse. This is set in the 1600s, and we meet Maria Owens, who learns witchcraft, is abandoned by a man who said he loved her, and she ends up in Salem. And the story is all about where this curse comes from. Again, Hoffman is just an excellent storyteller, and even though I like all of the books in this series, this one is my favorite. It's so good. Then we have one that is actually quite wintry, so if you want a witchy book for winter or for when it's cold outside, this is perfect. It's The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden, and this is set on like the edge of the Russian wilderness, where we meet a main character who can see house spirits, and these house spirits, like, it's common to make sacrifices to them, and they like protect the town and the houses and everything. And the story is about what happens when her father remarries a woman who actually believes that these spirits are demons, and so she makes everyone stop making sacrifices, and this makes the spirits grow weaker, and when they grow weaker, something in the forest awakens and grows stronger. There is quite a lot more to it, to be fair, but it's kind of hard to summarize, but this is very good. Magical, atmospheric, and if you like this one, this is the first one in a trilogy, so there's more to read if you want to. Moving on, we have A Secret History of Witches by Louisa Morgan, and this actually spans 5 generations of witches. So the book is split into 5 different parts, and each part focus on one generation and one woman. And the story is all about them and them living with witchcraft in their different times and how far they're willing to protect what they love. This is also one of those that's kind of hard to summarize, but I think if you like historical fiction, you'd really like this one. Next, we have Wayward by Amelia Hart, and this is also a book with several timelines. One is set in 1619, if I remember correctly, where we meet a woman who is accused of murder after a local farmer dies. One is set in, I think, the 1940s, where we meet a woman who finds herself restrained by the time she lives in, and she just wants to get an education and she wants freedom. And then the last one is set in 2019, where we meet a woman who escapes London because she has an abusive partner. And I would say that the magic in this, again, is kind of like subtle. This is more about like the characters, but yeah, this is one of those that I didn't absolutely love this book. I liked it, but I think I've just read a lot of books that are similar to this, so it didn't feel super original to me, but I know a lot of other people love this book. On to the next one, we have The Witches of New York by Amy McKay. This one is set in New York in the 1880s, where we meet these 2 women who open up a tea shop in Manhattan, and they cater to Manhattan's high society ladies, and they are experts in like tea and palmistry and cures and things like that. And then one day, this young woman turns up on their doorstep and she wants a job, and this woman has like powers that are way beyond anything they've seen before, and so they take her in, but then she disappears. And the story is all about what's happened. Obviously, I really like the historical setting of this, and the supernatural stuff is really cool. Lastly, we have one that, again, this could go into several different categories. It's the Virago Book of Witches, and this is a short story collection with all kinds of witch stories from around the world. So obviously, you can find something for everyone in here, and it's split into different themes. So we have alluring women and ailing knights, wise old women, witches in love, transformations, guardians of the seasons and elements, witchy devices, and hungry hags. And what I really liked about this one is that you get to see like different representations of witches in different cultures, which I think is very interesting. Finally, we have the fun and slightly chaotic books, starting with two books, again by T. Kingfisher, actually. The first one is Nettle and Bone, and I talk about this book all the time, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I love this book. It's set in a magical land where this woman decides to basically go on a quest to save her sister from her abusive husband, and along with her, she has a grave witch, a former knight, a very reluctant fairy godmother, and a chicken possessed by a demon. Now, the witch in here is kind of like a side character, but she is a big part of the story, and this just feels very magical and dark. It is kind of on the lighter side, it has some humor to it, but I just love this one. The other one is A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking, and this one follows a 14-year-old girl in a magical city, and she has magical abilities, but they're kind of limited. They only work on bread and baked goods, and her familiar is a sourdough starter. And if that doesn't give you like an idea of the vibe of this book, I don't know what will. It is really magical and whimsical though, and the story is about how she basically has to save her entire city using bread. Then we have these two books. We have The Wisteria Society of Lady Scoundrels and The League of Gentlewomen Witches, both by India Holton. And even though obviously the second one is the one that mentions witches, I'm just mentioning both of these because if you want something fun, a little chaotic, and ridiculous that features like magic, you can't go wrong with either of these. They're actually quite similar to each other, except they follow different characters. And yes, the main character in the first book is technically a thief. She does use some spell work because they actually use spells to power their flying houses, which are kind of like pirate ships. There's a lot happening in these books, but it's so much fun. They're also set in Victorian England, and both of them feature young women like at the cusp of adulthood and trying to figure out who they are and how they fit into society. And these books, I do think they are quite particular. Like if you read the first 50 pages of either of these and you don't like it, you're not gonna like the rest of the book. But if you're willing to sort of go with it and get on board with all of this like crazy over the top stuff, it's so much fun. I feel like you can't go wrong with either of these. Obviously the second one has more like witchy stuff in them, but I feel like both of them are actually quite similar, so you can't go wrong with either of them. We've finally made it to the end with Her Majesty's Royal Coven by Juno Dawson, and this one follows 4 witches who are all part of Her Majesty's Royal Coven. Obviously this is set in Britain, and they're involved in different ways when we meet them, and the story is about how all of them get caught up in this case with a warlock whose abilities may destroy them all, and they deal with it in quite different ways. There is a lot of, I would say, interesting themes and discussions in this book that I really enjoyed, but I put it into the fun bit because even though there are a lot of interesting discussions, it's not too serious, I would say, and it is like a really fun witchy read as well, alongside it having a lot of interesting themes and discussions in it. This is also the first in a series. I don't actually know how many books are out, but I have the second one and I really need to read it because I really enjoyed this one. That was the last book though, which means we've reached the end of this video. Now, I would love to know if you have any witchy book recommendations. I'm sure me and the other people in the comments would love to hear about it. And if I can add any new books to this huge list of mine, I would love it. That was kind of it for today though. As always, thank you very much for hanging out with me today, and I will see you soon. Bye!